what a treat I've got for you today. Okay, so today I'm going to talk very briefly about, I'm going to show you very briefly this book. You've seen this book before, and now I'm going to interview the author and the conductor, Paul Mann, who knew Jon Lord personally and worked with him in the past. I've got an hour with the two of them. It's going to be fantastic. Well, we've got an hour. I've got a load of questions. Frankly, with you two, we're going to go massively off piste, I hope. It'll be lovely to get some insight into Jon Lord, because you know what I'm like. I'm only here because of Jon Lord. I'm only sat talking to you two for that reason, and I'm sure you're the same, Ovais, with the with the book as well. And obviously, Paul, have you both met Jon?
I didn't.
Or is it? No, I didn't. So Paul has. So well, should we just have a bash? I just thought I'd ask you some questions and see where it all goes. How's that sound?
Perfect.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And thanks for everyone for doing it as well, and for including me in the book as well. I'm honoured to be in that, to be honest. And then when I saw Paul's name on it, I thought, it's great. Maybe I mean, I was going to start by asking you about who was met Jon, and how did you get to meet him, and was there a moment where you thought this guy's good, or this guy knows his stuff? And I suppose that's for you first, Paul, isn't it?
It was a bit the other way around for me because, of course, Jon was always in my life in a kind of distant form because of Colin. I mean, in 71, Colin left. I was 6 years old. And so, that was my first hearing of Deep Purple, was on the records that he brought back with him, including, of course, the concerto. And so I think the first time I met him must have been around 93, when Colin had arranged a get together after a Deep Purple show in Manchester.
Yeah.
To talk about the possibility of doing the concerto again. Because at that point, we didn't know that it would all been lost and that it was going to turn into this huge saga. And Jon was ushered in after the show to a dressing room where I was waiting for him. And actually, I kind of remember him being initially fairly, I don't know, maybe not exactly suspicious, but just a bit cautious.
Yeah.
He knew who I was and he knew about the background, but I remember him asking, why do you want to do this? Which I think was as much a reflection of his uncertainty about the value of the piece after all that time.
Right.
What about anything else? Why is it really worth doing this again? It was kind of like that. And then we kind of kept in touch, and then as we know, it was in the late 90s when it all started to become a reality. So I can't really say there was a moment where I became aware of him, because somehow I was always aware of him. It was from a very pre-consciousness kind of age.
Yeah. And for people who don't know, who's Colin to you?
Colin Hart was my he is very much still is my uncle, my mother's brother. And he left our hometown of South Shields in the early 70s to work as a roadie for Purple, and then eventually, as many people who are Purple fans will know, became the tour manager and was with them for 30 years.
And what I like in California Jam, you can see him, can't you, crouching in the background? Because I've had a look for that. I think that's him.
Yeah, you can also see him in what there is of the Made in Japan footage. He's hiding behind the drums at one point. The story is that Martin Birch sent him out to adjust a cymbal microphone or something, and you can see him lurking behind the drum kit at one point in those old little bits of footage.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. I was going to ask you about sort of what it was like to deal with Jon, and the energy that he had in the room. But I don't know, did you feel as if you've probably covered that by how you first met him, and he's kind of a little bit wary of you?
He was at first, but I think I can tell this story now. That what happened was that when he told me that he'd got this version of the score which had been reconstructed, I got a call from Colin actually to say, stand by your phone, Jon will be calling you about this.
Right.
At that time I was renting a flat in Notting Hill when I was working with the LSO, and he came round there and brought this thing with him, and we spent the afternoon looking at it. And Vicky later told me, bless her, she told me that he got home and she said, "How did it go? How was it?"
Yeah.
And he said, "I love him."
Oh,
And that
that's
was the first
fantastic.
meeting, the first real
Oh,
meeting.
wow. What a
Uh,
connection. Immediate connection, I
and
guess.
it was just like that, sort of some immediate feeling that, this was a friendship waiting to happen, and that's how it proved.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's really heartwarming, that is, isn't it? That's beautiful.
It warmed my heart at the time, and now, especially now that she's gone as well,
Yes.
especially so. She was a great
Yeah.
enabler, of that, not to be underestimated
Yeah.
in the background.
Never, never to be underestimated. So we'll talk to Ovais Naqvi, who is in the middle of my screen. I don't know where he's on your screen. Oh, no, so I was involved in this book here. Before we forget, brilliant title, make the right photo as well for the album cover, and I was helping you out doing a few bits and bobs when it comes to Hammonds and Leslie's and all the other stuff. And we had some wonderful Sunday mornings and Sunday afternoons looking at really old pictures, little black blobs with little circles on it, trying to work out what they were. So why the book and why now? What made you think, it needs to be documented in the way that you've done it?
Yeah, great question, Nick. And obviously, great pleasure to work with you as well.
Thank you.
The reality is, everyone talks about AI, and everyone talks about how, even content, machine learning driven content, automation, etc., or the ability of machines and artificial intelligence to write books. What it can't do
Yeah,
is get hold of Colin Hart when Colin Hart, God forbid, is not here. And it can't get hold of Jon Lord because he's not here. And it can't
absolutely.
tell the chronicling and the stories and the detail about any of these things because there is no mechanism at this point in evolution, technology, or anything else to be able to go, let's ask Jon Lord about his keyboards. What you're
Sure.
left with is all that he talked about. And then, by the grace of God, you're left with people like Colin Hart and Ozzy Hop and Willie Fife and Mike Phillips and obviously the rest of us who both either have direct experience and exposure to the individual. And when you talk about people like Colin, I can't get, and every time I talk to Colin on WhatsApp, I can't get my head around the fact that I'm talking about stuff and he was there.
I know.
We're talking about California Jam, we're talking about Made in Japan, we're talking about absolute landmark moments in the history of Purple. We're talking about the solo, on Highway Star, and Colin was probably standing there watching John play that. Now,
I
it's an
mean,
extraordinary thing, a
ugh,
very salutary thing, when you've got enough humility to go, wow, I mean, there is just something extraordinary about these people, never mind John. And you've got to capture
yeah,
them and document all these things before none of us or them or any of us are no longer around. So it came from that partial documentation thing of going, why don't we capture something that's meaningful to me and to lots of other
yeah,
people before it's too late? Before obviously crops up a lot in this discussion. And the second thing was that I felt that, when you look at, particularly Jon Lord, I feel, in fact, more so than Blackmore and more so than many guitarists, because as your background is telling the viewer, keyboards are complicated
yeah,
and every single one, like a vintage watch, is different.
yeah.
And all the organs, all the C3s behind you, each one's got a slightly different value to
It
you
has. Yeah,
and to a dealer and to somebody buying it because it's marginally different. Now,
correct.
what that means is that when you start going on blogs, and there are Hammond organ blogs, as you know, and synth blogs, and even ring modulator discussion forums, and never mind,
Yeah,
Yamaha DX7 and all the rest of it, you start realizing that there's an enormous amount of discussion going on because loads of people are really interested. It's a hobby and a passion and enthusiasm and a love for many, but there's no documented fact checking around getting it right. So, if I go on something, even if I'd have gone on there 5 or 8 years
yeah,
ago, I go on there and it's patently inaccurate.
yeah,
Someone will describe John as using a B3, or they'll get a
yep,
particular date wrong of when a certain piece of equipment was in his, in his rig. So I figured my second point was let's document it before it's too late.
yeah,
Secondly, let's grab everybody while they're around. Secondly, let's, you know, get a common frequency around knowledge and data and fact base so that everybody has the same understanding. And then thirdly, I figured it's just an amazing chronicle of an individual who's born in the 40s, plays music in the 50s, becomes professional in the 60s. So he spans half a century and more because he passes away in 2012. But he's around pretty much for 60 years of British musical history. So I figured just that guy is an amazing, almost like a barometer of British music.
Yeah, and a connector of people as well. So, I mean, between him and Tony Ashton, I probably knew everybody in the music business, I reckon. And speaking of the book, it's interesting because it is a coffee table thing, and it's a bit of a plug here. But for someone like me, it's a huge coffee table thing. And when I started before the internet, and I wanted to know how to overdrive organs before I could even afford Hammond organs, and you couldn't get that information. And then, so the reason why I started my channel was to, once I'd figured it all out, to give it to people for free because there's no way else. Everyone got a tone out of a Hammond, and they kept it their own little private secret. And I thought that was a bit unfair. So I love the book because I could go into. For me, it sits on my coffee table. I read pages and look at the pictures, but also it's deep, isn't it? And so there are rabbit holes in here, which I really like. Did it ever concern you that you thought maybe, or is it about the completion of the perfect technical text that you're after?
It's quite interesting. I remember having this late night conversation with Paul actually about 3 months ago, and I was finding myself getting quite obsessed. And Paul gave me a fantastic piece of advice. He said, unless you're obsessed, you won't be able to do it properly. You've got to be obsessed, number one, and you've got to dig in with that. It's a bit like method acting, and it's a bit like orchestrating or composing or what have you. You've got to be deeply immersed in it to be able to do it justice. And the reality was that, yes, for about close to 2 years, actually, I got completely immersed. I spent the bulk of my weekends and the bulk of late nights. I travel a bit and so forth. So, hotel rooms, at home, what have you. And then there's a kind of a tipping point, actually, where I don't know what other writers' experiences are, but I found it started to write itself. So, you plan it and you project manage, here's a chapter, here's an end, here's a kind of narrative flow, here's a series of pillars or building blocks in the story that have got to feature as landmark moments. And then you start kind of getting into it, and then you go, hold on, so one example of that is I definitely didn't intend to go deep into, Robert Moog or Alan Perlman or the Yamaha or any of that stuff. But what happened, I think, Nick, was that I figured if John's using a DX1, a DX7, a CP70, CP80, CP80M, an ARP 2800, a pro soloist or a string ensemble, etc., 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 you can't do that justice without talking about the human creators who made that happen. So talking about a Moog, talking about Keith Emerson without talking about Moog doesn't make sense. Talking about Moog without talking about Robert Moog doesn't make sense. And talking about Robert Moog without talking about Keith Emerson and Robert Moog working together doesn't make sense.
So that's that rabbit hole that you go down into the details.
You find that you end up having to go deeper. And then obviously, with a degree of editorial sensibility, I'm not Stanley Kubrick, so I'm not going to make a 2,000 page film or a book or the equivalent of a 10-hour film. And people like Mark Lewison, amazingly, is almost a brilliant example, who does all those Beatles books, who's now only done the first volume of his 3-volume Beatles set. He's still, from 2012 onwards, he's still at volume 1. He hasn't done 2 and 3. But the reality is, Mark will tell you that the short version of his book, I think, is 1,000 pages, the first volume. The second volume is 2,000 pages. I'm sorry, the first volume, the longer version, is 2,000 pages. And no doubt volumes 2 and 3 are going to certainly be 2,000 to 3,000 pages each in the long format. So I'm saying, that's a rabbit hole, because the Beatles story is deep. So I think with John and with this stuff, you can exercise a few cutoffs, and going down a rabbit hole becomes risky in terms of getting very, very marginal in terms of taking people with you. So what I tried to achieve was to let's go granular detail that's never going to be captured again. Let's talk to people who may not be around forever, but at the same time, let's make it readable.
And so, how did you and Paul meet then? Did you know each other beforehand, or was it just someone that you reached out through via Colin, I suppose.
Yeah. I mean,
Was
I've got a
it?
little bit of a history of doing these biographical works, and
Right.
you can either do them completely unauthorized, as it were, where, for example, no one talks because you're not official
Yeah.
and you're not necessarily legitimate. And if I'm Paul Mann or Colin Hart, I would quite rightly go, tell me a bit about you and what you're trying to achieve before I put my name against yours, or at the very least,
Yeah.
give you the kind of support you're looking for. So obviously, Paul is an extremely supportive guy, and I'm sure he helps many, many people who want to know about Jon. But obviously, we're talking about a complete different degree of immersion. We're talking, can you almost put your name against it? Can you give me some detail? Can you talk about Jon privately? You can trust me and all that stuff. So it's a bit
Sure.
like any biographical effort. You've got to build trust, and you've got to find the circle of people. So one of the things that I wanted to achieve was to make it less about me writing a book and to almost make it a little bit of a collective effort. So, between yourself, Nick, and Paul and
Yeah.
Colin and Nate Beaudry at Deep Purple Podcast, who, to answer your question, is the one who introduced us, and
Uh,
Rasmus Hyder at the Highway Star, and you know, Phil,
yeah.
Phil Aston and Pete Pardo, and whole loads of people. I find it interesting and great to bring people with you and to make it a collective effort. I'm definitely not.
Yeah.
I did it, me. I think it's
No, it's
when
impossible to.
because it's a community, Nick, and it's a Jon Lord community,
Yeah,
and
absolutely right.
no one's going to accept it unless it's authentic and unless your intentions are sincere.
Yeah, totally. And Paul, what did you think of the book when you got the copy of you got the hardback copy? Do you look at it as someone who knew Jon, or did you read it as a musician, and did you get anything out of it?
I got it. I went to London to meet Ovais, to go to get a copy of it, and for us just to meet because we'd done all our discussions and meetings had been online, and so it was lovely. We just
Right.
sat in a couple of restaurants over a couple of days, and he gave me the book, which I took straight back to the hotel and read from cover to cover that night. And
Fantastic.
I mean, to add to what he was just saying, I mean, it strikes me that one of the things that's quite beautiful about this is that the process of his accumulating all this information, all this data, not just about the specifics of instruments and all that research that he's done that has never been done before, but all the other
Yeah.
stuff, all the history, all the background stretching way back to John's childhood, um, all that kind of thing. You absorb all
Mm,
that, much as a musician studying a score observes and absorbs all the information in the score. But then the crucial
sure.
thing is illuminating all that stuff, not just regurgitating data and trying to sort of produce it in a sort of clinical way, but actually to illuminate from inside all of that
Yeah.
detail. And I think that's why the book is very successful because um, I think even if you are not really into all the nuts and bolts of the technicalities of it,
Yeah.
all you really have to be able to do is hear what Jon did and use the book as a way to illuminate that. And I think that's what he's done very successfully. And I think that's
Yeah.
a combination of study and also just being the right person to do the job. It was very clear when I was introduced to him that, he was absolutely not only to be trusted, but I mean was obviously doing this with his heart absolutely in the right place. And that's why,
Sure.
we did everything we could to support it.
That's fantastic. I mean, there's even a section in the book around John's influences and some of the little passages that he used to play in his ad libs and what have you. And I've put that on a Spotify playlist. So
Great.
I'm hoping that some of that, will come into my
Yeah,
fingers.
we had fun identifying some of that because John's um, knowledge was, I don't know, you could say, of course, it was encyclopedic, but I think it was also fairly instinctive. You get the
Right.
feeling that when he was playing certain solos, he was probably something was pushing at the back of his mind. Oh, that reminds me of that. Oh, okay, I'll play a bit of that. That's why you
Yeah.
get a quotation from the 1812 overture,
Yeah.
and that's why you get a bit of Dvorak here or a bit of whatever there. He was very eclectic, but he was also, I think, quite instinctive, and so it was quite fun identifying
Yeah.
that stuff. Some of which I hadn't picked up on before.
Yeah, it's quite
Wow.
funny. When you get quite geeky, Nick, and Paul was instrumental, pardon the pun, in that section. And it would be fair to say we only scraped the surface. Because if you go on YouTube, some generous soul has done a 3-part YouTube upload of 3 films or videos. They're just audio, actually, of Jon's classical references in all solos and in Purple concerts and White Snake. And basically all the solos combined in 3 different parts. I mean, if I've captured 20% of that, I've done well. I mean, there's an enormous amount of stuff in there that we couldn't get to because there's just so much. And obviously everybody's got musical memory, and it's not like everybody recognizes everything. So the net result is when you add it all up, there are probably scores and scores. I mean, we picked like a top 25. So what's interesting is, there's a whole load of stuff out there. If you were to document it, you could do a whole book just on Jon's keyboard signature pieces, classical pieces featuring in his solos from
Amazing. Well, maybe that's your second book. Maybe. Well, what I'll do is I'll find that video and I'll put it down here by the like and subscribe bell and what have you, and I'll link it.
I can just hear Jon's voice in the back of my head saying, "Oh, some people have got way too much time on their hands."
Absolutely. But what was funny was, just a little nerdy point. I mean, I picked out Samuel Barber, Adagio for strings. I thought, okay, let me be smart alecky. He may well have heard William Orbit's version and used it from there, thinking there's a bit of a zeitgeist around it. I then obviously did a bit of geeky research, and William Orbit had done it. Yes, he'd done it slightly ahead of Jon, playing it in 1996 in Poland. But you know what? William Orbit's version got taken off market because there was a copyright issue. So actually, William Orbit's version of Adagio for strings came out after Jon played it in 1996. So it just shows you how interesting is that, where you think, me as an amateur is going, well, that's probably where you got it from. No, he didn't. Orbit did it after.
Yeah. It was I can tell you about this because when we did the orchestral version, of course, I lifted the Barber's original and put it in the score.
Yeah.
And I think what it was Steve used to do that beautiful thing where he would just improvise over changing chords in the keyboards. And Jon would take the harmonies in all sorts of different directions, and Steve would just flow with him and find his way with those chords. And I was always so jealous of this, and I had this fantasy of being able to do that with the orchestra, but of course you can't do that with the orchestra. You've got to actually write the chords down for them to play. So when we made the arrangement, I just stole the beginning of the Barber that Jon had played, but I think his original idea was to use that as a way to lead into that sort of thing of changing the chords and then finding his way into the beginning of the song. And so we tried to sort of reproduce that orchestrally for that version. And as one of the things I always used to love about Steve, he was able to just fly over that harmonically.
And I think, and Richie did it as well, didn't he? I remember listening to the Nebworth thing when I was a kid. I was a kid then, in 1984, I think.
85.
And I stopped. 85, thank you. Album 84, Nebworth 85. And I stopped up and listened to it on Tommy Vance's rock show on Radio 1. And I remember that, where Richie gets a bit of feedback and then the organ just fades in underneath. And it changes entirely the feel of what Richie's doing as he keeps changing the notes, and it was just something I've always tried to emulate and rip off. Let's face it, because it's so beautiful. It's such a beautiful piece, and juxtaposed against everyone covered in mud and being like soaked on that particular day. Richie was in his wellies, and in fact they had plastic all over the back of the C3, didn't they? And in the pictures, because they were worried that the rain was going to come in at such an angle, it was going to blow up the DC motors in the back of there. So.
Right.
But I mean that everyone wants to sound. All the organ players that I speak to, they all want to sound like Jon Lord, right? That's fine, but nobody really does. Or a question for both of you really, from knowing him and researching him, why is it you think that no one nails that sound like he did?
You go first, Ovais.
Interestingly, there's a Deep Purple documentary called Access All Areas that came out last year with the Equals One. And
Yeah.
Don Airy says something amazing in that. He says, the guts of the Deep Purple sound is the Hammond organ. And he then says that, no one has and no one ever will sound like John, and I was hugely touched by that because that's like a landmark player going,
Yes.
forget everybody else, me included, and anyone to come, you can't quite ever sound like John. And I think if I were to answer the question, and obviously Paul will as well, it's to do with the human side, the humanity, and what's coming out of your heart and your brain and your fingers. You can create a sound, and if you look at, better than me, Nick, because you helped enormously in this regard, you can take effects pedals. Okay, you can take, replicating the drawbar settings and using foot pedals the right way and the playing techniques and the inverted fifths, and you can recreate the sound with the same Leslie and Marshall combination with the same calibration across those two things.
Yeah.
So between, the keyboard, the effects, the ring modulator, the drawbars, the reverb, the foot pedal, the effects, the Leslie, the Hammond, the tone, every aspect. I mean, you can recreate it and still not sound like him because you're not him.
Yeah. Yeah. You got anything to add to that, Paul, before I mention?
No, I think that's perfect. Absolutely. I think it's the same reason that, you could line up 10 great violinists and with the best will in the world, they wouldn't necessarily even want to sound like each other. They just are, because of the way their beings relate to the instrument. And
there's one. So sorry to interrupt. Yeah, there's one funny thing. I was watching an interview with about Alan Holdsworth, which I think Andy Edwards did with somebody, Nick, and he was famously slightly nervous type by disposition, quite self-conscious by disposition, and a few issues in that regard, but extraordinary player. And he showed up at a NAMM type event and was immediately mildly upset. It was a San Francisco event where he was going, but I can't possibly play this. It's not my guitar. It's not my amp. It's not. And the bloke who was there, who was with him, who gave the interview with Andy, said, but the bizarre thing was he just plugged the guitar into this basic little amp and he sounded exactly like Alan Holdsworth. So
there you go.
That's the flip side, which is, no one can recreate your sound, but you can touch a Bon Tempi organ and you still sound like Jon Lord.
There is a lovely story about,
I think you're spot on.
Sorry, we lost each other there for a second.
That's fine.
There's a lovely story about Jascha Heifetz, who was one of the great violin players, apparently receiving guests in his dressing room, and his violin was sitting there on top of the piano. And somebody came in and said, what a magnificent violin it was and how great it sounded. And Heifetz put his ear to the violin and said, can't hear anything.
Fantastic. Point made. Fantastic. That's really good, because when I was researching Jon Lord sort of personally years ago, I know when he changed his Hammond, he bought it from Christy McVie, I think, in 1974, and I know when he put the ring modulators on, and I thought he would, and we had electric pianos in there and all sorts of stuff going through the Stormbringer album and all that kind of stuff, and it followed him all the way through, and I naturally assumed that was his, and he was, this is my thing, this is my organ. But then I found out, I think, at the Perfect Strangers album, that was Richie's organ that David Rosenthal had been touring with, and apparently that's locked up in a garage somewhere and no one knows where it is. But it just sounded just like him, didn't it? It didn't, and then later life, then there was a B3s he'd use, or he'd use some, I think, well, you'll tell me, in the 90s, there was a compact one as well. There was one that had been done into for short form factor. So he was clearly using lots of different organs and clearly sounding exactly like him.
Yeah, I mean, we did I think the most interesting, probably the most, critical part of research we did in the book around Hammond was that, which is identifying every Hammond. So without getting into too much granular detail, I mean, obviously there was an L100 he used in the Artwoods. Yeah. On the 14th of February 1968, a date he remembered as well. He said, I can't remember many things, but I can remember the date that I got that Hammond. He got the Hammond C3. which obviously Heck Enterprises, the management group, will have funded. And, there he was with his own
Yeah.
C3, apparently bought from a dealer in Cambridge. And John's logic was that it won't have been used on the London gigging circuit, probably used in a church, maybe by an R&B band. And so it's much more likely to be in good condition.
Good.
He snapped it up. Anyway, point being, there's that Hammond, which interestingly blew up in 1971, early 71, because it was just obviously being pushed around on tour, and it just didn't last, and so forth. And then you get the one kind of A100, which he uses in the Highway Star machine head recording, which you see in the various photographs. Anyway, point being, we identified 7 of these different Hammonds. The one you identify is a cut down B3 that belonged to Rainbow Stroke, Thames Talent, etc., which was used on Perfect Strangers. And that same Hammond was used on the Come Hell and High Water tour in '93. And then in between you get other Hammonds. But the B Hammond you refer to was acquired by John from Christine McVie in '73. Fleetwood Mac was supporting Deep Purple across different tours, primarily North America, over that period. And she, according to John, did the money or what have you. So he paid for the Hammond and used it. Only visibly for the first time on California Jam. But that Hammond eventually did, it got repaired by a guy called Bill Axman in the 2000s. And I spoke in detail to Bill about it, and I've got a wealth of detail in the book, as you know. But it does sit currently in a state of disrepair, but it does exist. And my next mission is to probably try and find out if I can photograph it. But I know who's got it, and it's in safekeeping, and it will at some point, I'm sure, make an appearance at a museum or somewhere like that, hopefully.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, if you need a lift there, give me a shout. I'll take you along and help you have a look at it. I mean, it's truly incredible. And I think that's the, I was going to ask you about, because we researched his setup, didn't we? And lots of things changed. But what was the constant there that you thought when you looked at all the setups he had?
It's certainly the Hammond.
The
Hammond's the constant, and the reality is everything else comes and goes, because he used a piano really for the first time. Well, he used an RMI piano in Purple, okay, but he didn't use like a semi-grand piano or a electric grand piano until Whitesnake, until the CP70 in 1978, which then becomes a CP80 model, the 88 key version, and then the CP80M, which is the MIDI version of the CP80. So he started to use the piano, and then the piano featured pretty much permanently in the Purple setup. So I would say, to answer your question, the Hammond is absolutely the mainstay. The piano in different forms, and then he later on used the Roland after the CP80M in the early 90s. It's mainly Roland, and then you see appearances in his solo career where he's using the Roland. I think it's the X500 and then the 600. So I would say piano, Hammond piano, and then the ring modulator that you mentioned earlier. Right, which comes in 72 in the Never Before video at Croydon Fairfield Hall. That's the first time you see it. That stays in the setup until Slaves and Masters.
Gibson Maestro, wasn't it? Gibson Maestro ring modulator.
RM1A, So the ring modulator features a lot across Whitesnake, across POW, and across Purple.
And I remember reading an interview with him in the 80s, and he said when he found out that iteration of Gibson were going out of commission, going bankrupt, he bought all 6 of them, and he said he had 5 of them up in his loft. So if anybody's in his loft and would like to donate one of those to me, that would be fantastic. Can you imagine a pristine one of those? And I believe, and you might be able to correct me, you probably will, but I think the overdrive that he received from the organ was more about the signal being too hot for the Gibson and was driving through the circuitry. So when you hear Might Just Take Your Life and that lovely organ intro, the drive from that is not false. It's the Leslie on 10, which will give you a bit of bubble. But I think going through that Gibson was actually making that possibly unique sort of organ drive sound.
I think so, yeah. I mean, I think, there are a combination of factors, and I think the overdrive, is the classic kind of Jon Lord sound, that real growl,
Everything on 10. I've got it down here. I've got
absolutely. That's what gives you that thing. And I think what he worked out in that particular context was, I think here's a hypothesis. I mean, venues got bigger, Purple played to
Hmm.
bigger audiences, but by the time you get to Whitesnake, you get to Castle Donington and so forth, and then you get to Nebworth with Purple, and then obviously Purple are playing large arenas in the 80s. And I think a lot of it was certainly driven by a sound that he liked. He liked that really slightly growly, gruffle, kind of almost like a gruff sound that is the quintessential 80s Jon Lord sound. But I think a lot of it was also geared to getting the volume, because when you look, the thing you notice, everyone notices the keyboards in front. And the other day I
Yeah.
spoke to somebody and he said, it's almost like a spaceship of stuff. But the other thing you've
Yeah.
noticed, which you'll notice
Yeah.
more than most, is that that stack of Hammond, Marshalls. You've probably got actually two sets of four. So you've got eight Marshalls and you've got
Yeah.
Leslie's. And so the Jon Lord kind of, talk about taking up a huge chunk of the stage. I mean, you've got the keyboard set up in front, you've got the keyboard set up on the right around Perfect Strangers, you've got
Yeah.
the keyboard set up on the left around House of Blue Light with the DX1 and the DX7. And then you've
Yeah.
got all these Marshalls and Leslie cabinets. So it's like you're talking a truckload of sound and a truckload of volume.
Yeah, and I'll do my plug for Hammond Suzuki. I think hopefully you can.
Yeah.
I might be able to see in the corner. There's a little black Leslie. It says there, a little black one, which is the Leslie 3300. It's a black tone
Yeah.
explosion, and that's 230 watts or something like that. So your standard Leslie's 40 watts, and that's the problem. So
Yeah.
when you put a microphone in front of it, it'll pick up the Leslie, it'll pick up the bass guitar, it'll pick up the kick drum as well. It turns into like a feedback machine.
Yeah.
So a lot of people used to put them under the stage in the 70s
Yeah.
and close mic them and then run it through the monitors. And when I joined a couple of the heavier bands that I've played with in the past, I had to sort of decommission my 145, and my 122 really doesn't come out to play very often. And I've bought this 3300, which is it's a valve preamp. It's the old class A thing, so the valve preamp, but a solid state power amp. It's not as warm, but my God, it's loud enough, and
Yeah.
it'll get past the ego of any guitar player,
Yeah.
and that was the thing, that leads me on to a question actually for both of you. Paul, obviously you knew John. Do you think he was thinking like a rock guitarist playing the organ, or was he a classical player abusing the electricity?
No, I
Do you know?
think he was. I think a lot of this initially was motivated by not just a desire, but a need. I mean, to match Ritchie,
Yeah,
and that was also to do, I think, the full range of what he had to develop as a playing technique, because a lot of the time he's playing rhythm keyboards, which is something I don't know enough about it, but I don't think that many people had to do that before. That the I think
absolutely.
the example is the beginning of Hush, where he's playing what a rhythm guitarist would normally play.
Totally.
And that was part of it too. But no, I think I think he would resist any attempt to categorize between the rock side of things and the classical side of things. Um,
Right.
and I mean, obviously, when he left the band, that was a different story because he was only occasionally playing rock music, and so I think the emphasis perhaps changed. Um, but actually, that's what's fascinating about him. He seemed to inhabit all these places simultaneously, and just as Elgar once said, music are all around us. It's in the air. All you have to do is just reach out and take whatever you want. And
Yeah.
I think John was like that. He just took whatever he wanted from the musical universe he inhabited.
It's incredible. Did he understand the technology that he was using it at a deep level, or was it more instinctive and experimentative?
I don't remember him talking very much ever about the technicalities of instruments.
Right.
Maybe he just didn't talk to me about it. I think I had another place in his,
Sure.
in the sort of things he would talk about. But I think he was a combination of instinctive and interested in what the instruments could do for him. But I think his primary motivation was what the instruments could do for him, what kind of sound he wanted to make. And it's interesting for me because, of course, my first keyboard influence was not John, but was Don. I was
Right.
taken to a Rainbow show long before I saw Deep Purple live because I was 10 years old when Purple split up for the first time.
Sure.
And so I think I was first taken to see Rainbow in maybe 78, 79, 80.
Nice.
And I was put on a flight case behind Don. And I got to play the keyboards in the sound check. There is a photo somewhere of
Wow.
Don looking, of me playing Don's CS80 and him looking on rather anxiously, knowing that he would have to use that instrument later in the day. Um, uh, but um, but the idea that Don was so brilliant at surrounding himself and with all these amazing keyboards,
Hmm.
um, John John made do with a much more modest. I mean, Ovais will know much more than me about this, but I think that was his main motivation. Um,
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if I were to add to what Paul's saying, I mean, he always described himself as a technophobe. Multiple interviews where he says, "Look, I'm not that guy. Keith is brilliant at that. That's not me." And even an organ trio, possibly an R&B thing, but a keyboard trio, that's not me either. So, he
Right.
was very self-effacing. I think there's a combination of genuinely modest, genuinely self-effacing, a bit of selective memory, and then just a general wanting to be, seen as synonymous with Hammond organ playing, and with organic types of instruments. Now, the reality is what the book unearths, which is where it starts getting interesting, I feel, is that part of my motivation was to go, well, here's a guy who's synonymous with the Hammond, but actually, when you look at all the synthesizers and other types of instruments he uses, he's actually self-effacing as opposed to lacking in knowledge, because I've got around 54 to 55 different bits of keyboard kit, from Emu Proteus towards the end of the Korg 1M, which is all
Yeah.
module expander stuff, okay, into Kurzweil Micro Piano, which is also a module, and then all the way back to the Mellotron, which gets issued in a unit of about 10 in 1968. And John Lennon has one, and Rick Wright has one. And I think somebody from Procol Harum has one, or sorry, somebody from the Hollies, Graham Nash, I think. And then, Jon Lord has one. So the reality, and that's sitting in a collection of a guy called Winston Eggleston, who has Jon Lord's Mellotron. Okay. So the reality is, when you go back to Mellotron, RMI piano, and then all the periods and the eras of synth use, which start
Yeah.
really with the ARP heavily in the mid 70s, you see that New York concert, Smoke on the Water and Space Trucking and stuff, where John's using the ARP
Yeah.
Odyssey already. And then California Jam, he's got, the ARP Odyssey and the Fender Rhodes 73, which you'll know
Yeah.
very well, the suitcase
Yeah.
version of the Fender Rhodes 73 key. And then you go all the way into, obviously, the Moog era with the Poly Moog and Memory Moog and Moog Source and Micro Moog and Moog Opus 3, which takes you from 78 to
Yeah.
84. And then this emulator and so forth. So the point being, there's no shortage of money, thanks to God, at that time, certainly with Purple in 84.
Sure.
But he's got all the kit. He's got everything.
Yeah, and how do you? I noticed he had a DX1, and
Right.
I don't know the numbers, but I think they only made about 20 of them. There's
It's
not many.
140 units, and that was
140.
with people like Guy Fletcher from Dire Straits. You
Right.
hear a lot of DX1 on Dire Straits records in the mid 80s, and in fact, Guy only sold his about 4 months ago. I saw it on Reverb.
Right.
140 units owned by people like Elton John, and because that was a Brazilian rosewood, $10,000 at that time.
Yeah.
And it's a very, very collectible piece. So I'm saying, John had all the rig. It wasn't.
Yeah.
He could probably call Bruce and go, Yamaha DX1, that sounds interesting. Let's get a demo done. Colin or somebody else would organize for a DX1 to come in for him to have a play. And if you liked it, I'm sure his tag was not too much of a problem at that stage.
But you're right. I mean, certainly with the FM synthesis, you change one parameter and the whole thing's gone from a flute to a triangle. I mean, it's a crazy way of doing it. So you'd have to have some feel of what you're trying to achieve, what sounds you're trying to achieve,
Well,
unless you had a technical person right next to you. But I wouldn't
yeah.
imagine that would be the
I
case.
mean, yeah, so in the keyboard magazines, he gets a bit more detailed. I mean, obviously in the sounds and the Kerangs and Tommy Vance and stuff, he
Yeah,
keeps it quite general. But when you get into
yeah,
the Robert Doshak interviews from the late 80s, early 90s, you know, John goes into a fair amount of detail into some of the sounds and the rig. And obviously by then, if you'll also recognize that he's got the Hammond XB2, which
yes,
doesn't
I
last
had
very
one.
long, but he uses the electric digital Hammond for a bit, alongside, of course, the C3 and the B3 of Come Hello High Water.
Yeah, I noticed. I noticed that because I had an XB2. It's the only thing I could afford, a second-hand one
Yeah,
at the time, and it cropped up on the House of Blue Light, didn't it? And I think
correct.
what he was doing, he was using it to. There's one solo which is where there's obviously a synth following it,
Yeah,
following the organ, and I think he was using the MIDI to record
yeah. But
record the out sound at the same time.
he uses the XB2 actually on Battle Rages On.
Right.
You'll
Right, I saw it live. Certainly had it on top live as well, didn't he? For bits and bobs as well. I
He
saw
did.
that.
He had the DX7 and then he had the XB2 as well for Come Hello High Water, which is 93. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I like that album. That had mixed reviews, but I did like that album. That's some good organ sounds on it, which is what I liked from it.
Correct. Which are
So
hybrid XB2 and C3 sounds even mixed in, even with a clav sound from a DX7. So he's got a lot of stuff going on. He's experimenting a fair bit, even in
there's
90s.
a load going on there. Is it? I wondered what Paul. If you have to describe John's music, would you think what's the best way of describing his compositional school or genre? In classical music terms.
I think there's a bit of a dividing line around 2001 to when he started to feel that he had to leave the band in order to concentrate on composing. Because most of what he had written up to that point, either, those early symphonic hybrid pieces like the Concerto and Gemini Suite and
Yeah.
Windows and those kinds of pieces that had a very specific time and place. The shorter pieces on things like the Beyond the Notes album were sort of a transition in a sense between incorporating rock elements and jazz elements and also classical elements. And then the purely classical pieces. He was writing Boom of the Tingling Strings, which was what turned out to be Boom of the Tingling Strings in the latter period of the Purple years for him. And
Right.
that's where you start to hear his real compositional voice, which was always very strongly centered in English music. He was more fond of Vaughan Williams and Elgar particularly than of any other composers. And it's not to say that he set out to imitate them, but it's just how the music came out in that idiom. And it was very much where his heart lay. And actually, it's interesting because Boom does contain, particularly in the last movement, which is very rhythmically driving a lot of the time, containing still some backward looking. Not, I don't mean backward looking in in a judgmental sense, but backward looking as a sense of looking over his shoulder,
Yeah.
back towards the kind of rhythmic elements that were part of his playing in the band. But then he wrote Disguises, which is a piece for string orchestra, first movement, which is a portrait of Malcolm Arnold. He was very good at this, by the way. He was extremely good at portraying things in music. He had Elgar's talent of being able, sometimes with the very simplest of means, to suggest something, to suggest
Right.
the way somebody walked or the way somebody talked or the way they somehow expressed themselves.
Yeah.
He had a dramatist's sense for that, which harks back to his actor's training, I guess. He was good at doing accents. He's the only person I've ever met who could do a good Geordie accent, who wasn't actually a Geordie, because all those misspent years with my Uncle Colin.
Oh yeah.
So I think he had a gift for imitation, as anyone who knows ever heard him tell a joke knows.
Mm.
He was good at accents. He was good at picking up on people's mannerisms, and that went into the music.
It's really
And
interesting.
there are also lots of other pieces that were unfinished. One of the things that I noticed when after he died, and um, I went through uh, all the musical stuff that was on the computer, and I realized how incredibly hard he worked in those last 10 years.
Right.
Um, if you look at what's finished, you see five major works, and you think, well, is that all? But actually, there was a huge amount of stuff that he didn't finish, and there's quite a bit of music sitting in there that we haven't been able yet to um, excavate. When he died, he was working on a big orchestral piece called The Mountain, which was a portrait of Switzerland, and it was going to be premiered in Lucerne, and I was going to conduct it. And there's about 10 minutes of it, the last 10 minutes or so, and it's wonderful. We just haven't found a way yet you know, to make use of it. So there's an enormous amount of music, and I think that the identity of it, and I think this is perhaps what he would have thought too, is profoundly, if I can put it this way, profoundly English.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so too. And so I was going to ask you actually about how his formality as a composer. Did he scribble ideas down, or was he very structured? Can you tell me
Bit
something
of,
about his method?
a bit of both. I mean, he used to, a safe present for John was always one of those little notebooks. I've got one here, these little things.
Yeah, yeah,
And he used to put it in his pocket and go for a walk with the dogs and scribble ideas down, um, which is something that, for example, Beethoven was well known for doing.
sure,
Um,
yeah,
and in fact, the beginning of Boom of the Tingling Strings, the beginning of the third movement, the slow movement, is constructed out of the noise that the gate that he had to open to get into the field behind his house, the noise that it made when you pushed it forward to go through it,
yeah.
and the noise that it made when you pushed it the other way to go back through it. He notated that in musical pitches, and that made up the theme of the beginning of Boom of the Tingling Strings. So that was the sort of thing he would do.
Fantastic.
Um, and he would
That's
come back
fantastic.
with a bunch of stuff, piles of little bits of paper. He used musical notational software. He used Sibelius, and
Sure.
but he didn't always compose in that. He tended to like to compose with a pencil and a bit of paper in the old-fashioned way, and very
Hmm.
often would end up with huge amounts of material. I mean, I remember in the composition of the Durham Concerto, he really got himself into a bit of a dead end by just accumulating so much material that he didn't know
Right.
what to do with it. And that piece was originally, I think, you know, even longer than it's an hour long now, but I think it was going to be
Yeah.
even more than that. And I think once he got all this material, somehow it all came out of it, the same place. He somehow inhabited the place that the piece was going to be, and the material evolved out of that. So it was never too diverse. It was somehow always related motivically to what he'd already done. And so then all he had to do was to assemble all this, and somehow every time that's how it came together, and uh, but he was not. I wouldn't want to give the impression that he was totally instinctive. I think there was an awful lot of very clear direction, a very clear sense of where he was going with things. He knew what he was doing. You know,
Yeah.
people sometimes think with rock musicians who get into this that they don't really know what they're doing. They're just getting ideas above that, but
Yeah.
Don really knew what he was doing. And
Another direction.
yeah,
He knew what he's going to get to.
yeah.
But
And I think he always knew if he hadn't got it. And I think he worked extremely hard. This is another thing that I would want to emphasize, because I think there is an impression that some people have, and perhaps in the classical world, some people have it more than in the rock world, that rock musicians somehow aren't disciplined. They just turn up and they make a lot of noise, great time, and then they go and you know drink a lot and that sort of thing. No one
Yeah,
who'd ever been around Deep Purple would have thought that. They were immensely disciplined, and the discipline,
sure.
the ease with which they deployed that discipline could disguise it, but it was there, and it was there all the time. So the discipline that John had to apply
It's good. Yeah.
to classical music, he applied it. He just took it from that end of the spectrum and moved it into that one. He was enormously disciplined
Yeah.
in what he did.
That makes a lot of sense, and I was gonna ask you both actually. Getting back to the book a little bit. What if younger people discovering Jon Lord now, or what would be the wrong way to approach his music? What would be the wrong way to discover Jon Lord, or is there a wrong way?
Ovais, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think on some level there's no wrong way, because the reality is if you listen to it and you like it, there are varying motivations that get you into something, and those motivations can actually land you in the right place. You may not have
Yeah,
gone in with the right intention, but you land up at the right place. So in other words, if I was perhaps a teenager and I wanted volume and I wanted Black Sabbath and Purple just on the basis of loud volume music, which was, I
yeah,
have to say, one of the motivations when I was a teenager.
yep,
The volume was an important part of it. It wasn't unrelated to volume. Um, Hence the hearing issues of many of us, if not older
yep,
musicians themselves. So
yeah,
volume is in itself an example where you enter because of volume, but then your musical appreciation eventually develops, led by the volume, but your sophistication reaches the point where people like Paul, when Paul's talking about Steve Morse, and when you talk about Ritchie Blackmore, and when you talk about Lord's wider harmonic sense and compositional sense, I went in
yeah,
through volume, but I've landed up somewhere else. And some people stay up volume and energy. I mean, I think for me, there's another way of answering the question, perhaps, which is, there's an energy with rock and an energy with heavy rock and an energy with 70s heavy rock. There's a rawness. It's not clean sounding per se, and you can do all the remixes of Made in Japan you want. But you know what? If you still buy that recording from '72, it's still great.
it is still great. You're absolutely right. And on the book, then we're coming to a close of the conversation. But I wanted to ask you a few more questions if you've got time about the book. When people finish reading the book, what do you hope they walk away with? Is it like the sound that they've conjured the sound in their head? Is it a better understanding or a sense of Jon Lord?
It's interesting when it did occur to me a while back that many rock musicians have tried to make a foray into other genres, not just classical but other things. And the reality is, I think for me there are two standout people who've come out of heavy rock and built extraordinary careers outside. One is Robert Plant, actually,
Yes.
who outside of Zeppelin and that genre has done, I think, an extraordinary job of taking other forms of music into the mainstream,
Yeah.
from Alison Krauss to loads of other things he's done. So I think Robert Plant is one and John is the other. And the reality is, for all the, no disrespect, but for all the attempts by various people to do classical music and do reggae or do soul music or whatever it is, I think the two standout figures for me who have really transcended the genre they started in and landed up somewhere else are Robert Plant and Jon Lord, number one. So I'd love for people to take out the single biggest thing that he wanted people to take out of his music, which is if it works for your heart and it works and it gets to your head through your heart, it works. And I would say I would love people to read this book and go, he was number one, musically sophisticated. Number two, he was very much about form and practice and understanding your instrument, understanding sound, understanding music. Number three, he was about
Sure.
collaboration and team spirit with other players. It was never about me, me, me. He could stand there and do his solo and be as charismatic as anybody in the music world. But if he had to support
Yeah.
Ritchie, he'd support Ritchie. And if he had to support Glenn, he'd support Glenn. So he had no ego issues in that regard. And the fourth thing is, I think, the extraordinary humanity. I mean, I can only pass the ball, pass the baton to Paul on this, because I think it's
Yeah.
a fitting way for Paul to end it. But the humanity to me, Paul, is the extraordinary feature that makes him such a warm person for you to want to spend your life writing about and not get bored by him.
Yes, I think you captured that too in the book, and I think he was perhaps above all the other things that you've just mentioned. He wanted to affect people emotionally. Um,
Yeah.
he was very reserved emotionally himself, um, and at times, of course, it came pouring out of him in certain situations. But he was it generally it all went into the music. I've conducted all of the pieces that he wrote in those last 10 years.
Hmm.
And I've been taken sometimes by surprise, particularly when I did the Durham Concerto. I did it in Germany. Um, and I, uh, I made a little change in the last movement, which I hope he would have approved of. You remember in that piece, there's the Northumbrian pipes.
Hmm.
And as she plays her last few phrases, he wanted her to sort of fade out,
Right.
and then for the orchestra to finish the piece. And I just thought, why don't we get her to actually walk off stage?
Wow.
As she's playing, just let her walk away. And
Yeah.
as she's playing and she's getting quieter and quieter, we made the orchestra get softer and softer and softer, as if
Right.
they didn't want to lose her.
Yeah.
And in the performance, it was just one performance, I think. I was really taken by surprise by how I hope he would have approved of that. It wasn't his idea, but somehow that seemed to reflect what I thought his idea was. Um,
Yeah.
uh, he did share, I think, with Elgar, a sense of regret in his music. I'm not suggesting that that was specific in his case. It was, I think,
Sure.
just a very nostalgic nature and um, a very emotional response to everything. Um, and so I think he was always most um, moved and most willing to give time to people who came to him and expressed what his music had meant to them. I remember we were sitting having dinner one night, and there was a guy hovering, um, not quite having the courage to come up to him, and we sort of gestured to him to come, and he said that he just couldn't believe that John was there, and that they'd been sitting having dinner with his wife, and he'd had Pictured Within played at their wedding, and that it was their favorite
Oh.
music, and things like this meant the world to him, because then he knew that everything that he'd sacrificed in leaving the band, it wasn't easy for him to leave Deep Purple,
Sure.
and he felt the pull from time to time. Um, the amount of work he had to do to re-establish. I mean, at a time when most people you could be forgiven for, trying to take it easy. He entered a new
Mm.
phase of his life in a world that wasn't always as welcoming to him as they should have been. Uh,
Mm.
and where he often had to play the card of being Jon Lord of Deep Purple in order to get something done.
Open the door, basically.
Yeah, all those sacrifices were for him redeemed by an emotional response from people, and that's what he was, I think, looking for the most.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, before I thank you both, I want to, first of all, I'm going to put my glasses on for this bit because I need to plug your book for you, don't I? So thank you. First of all, thank you for my copy. Thank you for writing it as well. I found it absolutely fascinating. There's a bit towards the back as well, which is a list of every model of keyboard that he played, which is just that was just great. That must have taken you forever to do that. So thank you for that. This is the book. This is the book that I wanted to be written because it's as an organ player for me, it's nerdy enough for me to really get into it. But I'm also learning a bit more about the man as well, and I thought that I knew a fair bit about him. So I'm really pleased for that. It's called Before We Forget, a work in 8 movements. Where can people get it from?
Yeah, it's still available. Very small number of copies still available at Before We Forget .store, which is the website we built for it. And then there will be a trade version later on in the year.
That's fantastic.
In bookshops.
Thank you very much, guys. It's been great. It's good to catch up with you again, Paul. It's good to meet you as well.
It's lovely to see you again, Nick.
It's always good. Hey, we're all in the Midlands. You know, I could almost throw a stone at Robert Plant's house. I mean, I used to sit on walls with him after gigs and talk about Alison Krause's reverb settings and stuff like that. So it's all very sort of local around here. But next time you're in the area, come to the Groove Laboratory and I'll buy you a cup of coffee. But thank you. Thank you so much for your help with this. I hope that people watching this are going to get as much out of it as I did. And of course, you can get your own copy as well from all good bookstores. And what was the website again? Before I forget.
Before we forget .store, STORE.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, guys. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. See you, Paul.
Wonderful. There we go. How did that go? I know we had an hour, so I wanted to just sort of close it a little bit, an hour, 10 minutes.
Fabulous. How do I get the recording to you, Chief?
First of all, make sure you get it onto your hard disk. You can use WeTransfer.com.
Okay.
Which is quite a good one, and you can send up to 2 gig. If you have any other problems at all, we can have a chat about that, Dropbox files and stuff like that, and what have you.
Brilliant. I need to get it off Zoom onto my desktop, for example.
I think when you stop, it will put it on. It'll start. It's been saving it as it's been going on. I think so. Yeah. When you press stop, it'll appear on your desktop somewhere.
Okay.
Fingers crossed. I've also done a capture as well here that's still recording just in case we have any difficulties as well.
Okay, amazing. Thanks a lot, Nick. Fabulous.
Great.
Beautiful. How enjoyable. Thank you, everyone. We're all in England. Brilliant. I thought we were all over the world. I would have got in a car and I could have driven up and poached you somewhere.
Yeah, no, it worked out. I've been in since the beginning of last week, and Ovais and I met in Manchester last week to do the signing of the books, and so I'm going back tomorrow.
Oh, fantastic. Well, safe journey. My brother's nipping off to Slovenia tomorrow as well, so I'd say
okay.
The weather's okay.
I hope it's on time. I think they've had some extreme temperatures over there, but I think it's starting to thaw out a bit. Right. Thanks, Nick. It was good to do that.
Like it is over here.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you so much. I look forward to speaking to you whenever our paths cross next.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
See you later, both. Thanks a lot.
See you, Nick.
Cheers.
Bye-bye. Hello and welcome back. What did you think of that? Oh man, that was amazing. It's so good to hear Paul talk about some of the experiences he had with Jon that we wouldn't normally hear about. And for the book goes into such amazing detail that we really want to know about. All us organ players want to buy this book, let's face it. But I think it's quite interesting as well. All I'm getting out of it is the book. He gave me the book, which is brilliant. And obviously I contributed to it as well. So I got a little name check in there, which is about as close as Jon Lord as I'm going to get, isn't it, right now? But I really enjoyed that. I thought it was fascinating. I hope you did too. Like and subscribe. Also put things in the comments, please. Let me know what you think. If there's anything you want me to ask either of them, I could have a bash. I certainly do know where they are. So I could go around the house and ask them for you. So I hope that was lovely. I'll see you soon. Thank you. We just talk about organs. I thought it was good to have the camera showing this way for a change.
Oh, so you could. Yes, I'm afraid I can't do any better than I'm in a hotel room, so all I can do is give my curtain here.
Oh, bless you.